Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, and I am excited. I've got my good friend Ben here today. We're going to be talking about all the things leaders need to be thinking about after, post-pandemic. Well, it's not really post-pandemic, like first pandemic. I don't know. We'll get into it. We'll get into it a little bit. But before I get started, I do have to mention that we are hiring at Foundry. Yes. Ooh, what a shocker. If you've seen one of our shows, you've seen we are hiring. Go and check out foundrymakes.com/careers. Check it out. Tell a friend. Tell two friends. I'll tell Ben. Ben, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Kurt. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, Ben, tell me about where you're at and the work you do.
Yeah, well, I'm representing Canada here today. I live in the center of Canada, right near Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I'm the president and founder of Cantera Leadership. I do leadership development work with leaders in lots of different industries. I do a lot in the tech sector, actually, leadership development work. And
the type of work that you do, is it long-term consultative? Are you coming in and just doing assessments and taking off and leaving them with some stuff, or how do you normally engage with your clientele?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag in lots of ways. There's different approaches that I take. The biggest impact, of course, is when I'm able to work with organizations over a longer term, because when it comes to something like leadership development, for example, it's not a light switch. You can't just flick a switch and like leaders are magically they become leaders or better leaders. It takes time. So I do integrate some assessments in the work I do as well. But yeah, it's the ideal situation. Take a little bit of time to get it done right.
Right. And tell me about, because I'm always fascinated in talking with people in your line of work. What are people showing up and asking? Are they showing up and saying, "Boy, I'm a bad leader and I could really use some help," or is somebody showing up and saying, "My boss is a really bad leader. Could you go and prospect him or talk to him?" I'm always interested to hear from people in your line of work, like, how do people first usually engage with you? What are they saying? What are the problems that they're mentioning? How does it work?
Yeah. It's rare that I get an employee that comes to me and is able to convince their boss to hire me based on their view of the boss. But it actually has happened once where I had someone. Yeah, it's actually happened once. And it actually ended up that I did some work with the company. But the more common situation is when some kind of executive in the organization, not always the CEO, it could be another different senior leader. And most of the time, they actually come and they're thinking about their team and about the leaders that work for them. So there's always an interesting conversation, because I believe that every leader, no matter how amazing you are, has a gap between where you are and where you can be.
Yep.
And so that can often be a really interesting conversation, because to me, any kind of leadership change and team development, it always starts at the top. You always got to talk to the guy at the top and the gal at the top, whoever's at the top, and see how it works its way down through the organization. If they're not ready to say, hey, that they can grow and they can improve, how they expect it from their team.
Right, exactly. If you're hoping for, if you're hoping from change starting from the bottom up, it's not usually how it works in organizations, right?
Yeah, exactly. I keep thinking of I think it was Jim Collins, who had his team. He sent his team out to do some research around, hey, what's the biggest factor in successful organizations as to what brought them success? And he told the team before they went out, whatever you do, don't come back and tell me it's leadership, because that's cliche. We don't want a cliche answer. Don't tell us that.
Can't be leadership. Exactly,
can't be leadership. So he sent his team out. His team came back, and his team's like, "You're not going to like what we have to say." It's leadership. The biggest differentiating factor in companies that are successful is leadership. And so from the CEO all the way down, if your leaders aren't equipped, if your leaders aren't empowered, if your leaders aren't engaged and kind of leveling up themselves, then hey, it's going to impact your whole organization.
Yeah. Well, let us start at the bottom, right? So how does one know when they're ready to be a leader, right? Because in a lot of organizations, people are kind of thrust into those areas, right? So I've seen in a lot of places where, well, you're the best marketing person, so I'm putting you in charge of the marketing department, or you're the best salesperson, so you're going to be vice president of sales. These things in organizations feel like they be natural, but they don't seem to spend any time actually training these people, because they assume if you're so good at the job, you can just, through osmosis, I guess, just make sure everybody else is doing what you're doing, which in my experience, trying to make people work like you do is a horrible way of doing leadership. So talk to me about how somebody knows when they're ready for leadership, or how do they know when it's time for them?
Yeah, you bring up a very interesting point, because it's exactly what happens. Most high achieving individual performers in an organization, they often are the ones that get promoted into a leadership role. And they could be a very good fit, but there's a little bit of a mix when you talk about leadership, whether it's nature versus nurture, how much comes naturally, how much can you learn. There are some people who are natural leaders in a lot of ways. And if you happen to be a person that is a very high individual achiever and you get put into one of those roles as a leader now, you might succeed with some natural ability. But a lot of cases, you have people who may not have as much natural ability as others, and all of a sudden they're in this role. And I don't know if it's so much that leaders or CEOs or organizations need to be like, okay, well, who are our best leaders? Sometimes they can have a good conversation around that. Yeah. Who is ready to learn how to be the best leader they can be is probably a good starting point when you're thinking of who they should be having in those roles and who wants those roles. Sometimes you put someone who's a very good individual performer into a leadership role that they don't even want. Part of the struggle that we have is that often we assume that the next level up has to be a leadership role for someone. Well, maybe organizations need to test that a little bit and say, hey, can we keep this person who's an amazing X? Can we have them continue being an amazing X? Because maybe leadership isn't what they want to do or what we think that they're good at, and go from there.
Well, because, again, I'm a bit older. So when I was growing up, it was pretty much assumed that if you were going to move up in your career, you were going to manage people at some point. Right. Whereas now I've seen, at least in some more mature organizations, where they do have multiple tracks for leadership, where it isn't just managing people, but there is ways. But traditionally, in more smaller to medium-sized companies, managing people is the only way to get a raise or to get a senior title or things of that nature, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then what we fail at, and that's probably a faulty model in the first place, but then we compound it by when we put them into leadership roles and we just let them loose and kind of be like, now just lead. Well, what does that mean, right? Like, I don't know how to lead. I've never led. Most people don't even confess that. They just
that's the point I wanted to get to, Ben, is because you're not going to tell your boss, I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, that's scary to say. And if your boss sees this potential in you that you don't necessarily see in yourself, who are you to say no to more money and more seniority in the organization, more, because I'm assuming if you are doing well, you're assuming that you do want more responsibility. But that responsibility can translate into your boss or somebody saying, oh, that you want more responsibility, so here's 10 people. Make sure that they fill out their timesheets.
Yeah, make sure they fill the timesheets, that they, don't leave work too early at the end of the day. And that's usually becomes a lot about the managing the operational tasks of a role that is what is taught. And that is a piece of being a leader and being a manager. I mean, I use those titles somewhat interchangeably. I think that they're different, but to me, you're a leader no matter what role you're in. We all lead and we all influence in some way. And so it often talks about, hey, just cross the T's, dot the I's in your role. And it forgets about how do you actually get the best from your people, right? How do you empower your team? Because now when you're leading a team of 10, you used to just worry about yourself mostly, right? Maybe your teammates, you sometimes would work together, obviously, but a lot of it just rested on you. Now as the leader, your number one responsibility is how do you get the best from the people that are on your team? So if you have 10 people now on your team, like you suggested in that scenario, you're going to have to figure out how to connect and motivate and empower 10 unique people in a unique way that you may have never experienced before as to how to do that. And so how do you help them do that? And that's really what I get passionate about, when I'm able to help people become more effective at leading others, empowering others, influencing others, and understanding what that means.
So do you think that, and I've seen this happen before, where just like you said, a person gets, this is where the biggest problem is I've seen over and over again. And tell me, Ben, if you've seen this as well, is that you do move that individual contributor to that managerial position. They kind of, are like, well, if I can handle this stuff, I can handle this fine. They go home and complain about it, and then they show up for work and they start getting to work. Maybe they pick up the 10-minute manager or whatever it is book,
the 1-minute manager. Yeah.
The 1-minute manager or whatever it is. Yeah. I mean, it's like 6-minute abs, it's like whatever. Anyways. Yeah. So they pick up, they do a little, and then they start going, but they are so primed that their value to the organization has been in their individual contributorship. It's not in the management of the team. And where I've seen people struggle the most is being able to remove that idea that I truly only provide value by doing the job that I've been doing.
Yeah.
And because that's what I've been compensated for. Now I've moved into this different job, which I don't know how to do. So what am I going to do? I'm going to fall back on what I already know, because I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. And so the only way to fill that gap is to contribute more. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it becomes a vicious cycle, right? Because you still want to succeed when you're put into those roles. And if you're a CEO and you've put someone into one of those roles, they actually really are people that want to succeed and do well in that new role. But when we haven't given, I guess, a framework or I like using the word actually picture frame for our leaders. When you think of, because leadership is actually more of an art than a science in some ways, right? It's hard to define it perfectly. But so what does it mean to be a leader? Well, what's our picture frame, or what's our canvas that we're painting, right? But we need to, even when you're painting on a canvas, you still have a defined edge to that canvas, or a picture frame to being a leader. So can you, as a CEO, first of all, for yourself, define your leadership or define your boundaries of your leadership, but can you help your people and your organization that are in those leadership roles understand that uniqueness of that role, what the frame is around the picture that they're painting? And they're going to paint it uniquely because they're unique leaders and unique managers in your organization. Give them some of the proper tools, give them some of the proper engagement, and empower them to be the best empowering leaders that they can be to their teams. And that's where you really start to get the synergy, because, and the studies are clear, 70% of employee engagement is based on the leader or the manager in the organization. So if your organization is having troubles, if your team is disengaged, if your turnover rates are high, if there's other struggles going on with your people in your organization, 70% of that is because of managers, because of leaders. So if you're not intentional in investing into those leaders that you have, that's a big piece of the pie that you're not addressing. You need to address that pie and figure out what your strategy is for them.
So do you think that, do you think that they rely too much on the person because here's the title. Right. Now go ahead. I had to figure it out. Nobody taught me anything. Yeah. So I've literally had that with a boss in my past. Like, nobody trained me on anything. Nobody gave me any help. So why do you need help? Which I thought that's very white of you to say. But do you feel that there is sort of a because I'm imagining, Ben, people don't show up to you before they need help.
Yeah, I used to joke around with people and I say I only work with leaders who aren't perfect, right? So like if you're perfect, don't come to me, right?
I
So
like that. I like that.
yeah, yeah, uh, yeah. Like oftentimes one of the challenges that leaders have, that CEOs have, that organizations have, is that they're working so much on putting out fires, right? There's always so much time pressure. There's so many projects that they have. There's so much stuff going on, and there's this fire, and there's this deliverable, and this client has a problem, and this person hasn't paid yet, and this person called in sick, and now I got to somehow fill in, and this person quit, and now I got to put out that fire, and all these fires get in the way of actually trying to think, okay, how do I actually grow leaders? Because there is that mindset, oh, they can just figure it out. They can just figure it out. Only a few people are able to actually figure it out on their own. Just because you did or someone did doesn't mean that everyone can. And even if someone says, I figured it out on my own, did you? Like,
Did you really?
yeah,
Did you? Because you
probably,
seem to be right in this moment. You
yeah,
seem to be struggling in this conversation
exactly.
I'm having with you. Um,
Exactly, right? So there's definitely gaps that are there that sometimes we just don't even recognize. We
sure.
often are blind to, we don't see the things that are right in front of us sometimes, right? The blind spots that we have.
Right. Well, what resources? So maybe I'm still trepidatious about reaching out to somebody
Yeah,
like you, Ben. What do you suggest to people? So back to when I was growing as a leader, in some organizations, they would just hand me whatever book was some
yeah,
old white guy wrote
yeah.
that, was about winning friends and eating last and starting with why
All the cliches. Yeah,
yeah, and they would be like, here, we're going to have a leadership book club. I'm going to read these
yeah,
things, and then we're going to sit around a room and uncomfortably try to talk about what we learned in those things.
yeah,
Because, we didn't actually learn anything because they're mostly theoretical and they don't really
yeah.
apply to my role or anyways, sorry, I could go, I could go on. But where do you suggest people start when, let's say they're
Yeah,
in a leadership role right now and they're looking to improve? What have you
yeah.
seen work?
Yeah, so I'd have a couple thoughts for them. The first one that I talk about with almost everyone that I do meet with as a leadership consultant, leadership coach, is what I call intentional leadership times. I've also called it sacred leadership times because I just talked about all those fires that we put out. And as a leader, you feel like you have to be putting out fires, and if you're not putting out fires, then you're struggling with figuring out how to define your role. And we have all these meetings and more meetings, and got to do this, got to do that. Schedule some time where you put on your leadership hat and you say, what does it mean for me to lead Sally? What does it mean for me to lead Bob? How do I be intentional about helping them towards excellence? What about myself do I need to change for that? And I call it sacred leadership time and I encourage people, start with 15 minutes just once a week. 15 minutes once a week. You think you can do that? I guess. I mean, 15 minutes is almost a no-brainer, right? It should be a no-brainer that you can find 15 minutes to just be intentional about how to be a better leader. Now, ultimately, that 15 minutes needs to grow, and leaders almost immediately start to find that after they've gotten used to 15 minutes, that they actually need a little bit more time. And it's a change of mindset, because most time it's like, I'm just wasting time in that 15 minutes. I got these other
Right.
things I should be doing.
I'm
But if
being
you're not putting
reactionary.
yourself, exactly, if you're not putting yourself in that intentional headspace of how do I lead the best way that I can lead, then you're missing an opportunity to really level up your leadership. So that's a simple thing that anyone listening to this right now, if you don't already do that, go into your calendar right now, block out 15 minutes once a week, call it sacred leadership time, whatever you want to call it. So when it shows up on your notifications, that you actually remember that it's non-negotiable. Go take that 15 minutes and go and do that. I think that'd be a
Uh,
great help.
I love that. So what about, resources, books, online
Yeah,
learning,
absolutely.
conferences, what are things that you get inspired by?
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the tools that I use in a lot of the work that I do, and I think it's a fantastic tool, it's the Clifton Strengths Assessment. It's a talent assessment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a personality assessment. Personality assessments have a place as well. There's a lot of mixed feelings around personality assessments. There can be a lot of value there. If you're using them correctly, I think they can be a big help. But the Clifton Strengths Assessment, it's more of a talent and skill assessment. Skills, not in the sense of like, hey, I can paint well, but more in the sense of what makes you unique in the talent that you bring to your role. And it's used in 90% of the Fortune 500 companies, but I think it really helps people with self-awareness. Because Kurt, me and you, if we're leading teams of people, we're going to lead our teams very differently. If we can put language around that, as how I might lead versus how you might lead, and how the teams that we're working with might engage with us, if we can put some language around that, it's going to help us to lead better and get the best from our team, motivate them, challenge them, encourage them, the way that fits for them. Because not every person responds the same way to every leadership style, right? So you got to
Right.
figure out who you are and how to best relate to others. So I use that a lot. That's put out by Gallup. And Gallup, one of Gallup's books that I think is a really good book to look at, especially from a manager role. And if you're just stepping into a manager role, it's called "It's the Manager." It's the book, and it's the one that where I talk about that 70% of employee engagement is dependent on the manager. That book is 52 chapters. They're short chapters that allow you to just kind of take bite-sized pieces of how to build your team, how to build your culture, what do some of those things mean, and it gives very practical tidbits and advice. The third thing, and it's a little bit of a self-promo, and I don't want to self-promo too hard, but I've taken a lot of these things that we've been talking about and I've packaged it into a tech leader accelerator. So it's for tech companies to send their new leaders or even old leaders who need to re-up their leadership
Yep.
abilities.
Yep.
And it's a 6-month program that I developed that it's a mixture of cohort learning as well as one-on-one sessions with me as well. It's not a video course where you just press play and watch it and get nothing out of it. It's very meant to apply to your context and how to increase your ability to lead and take action steps forward. But they can find out more about that if they contact me on LinkedIn or something. But
Yeah, the thing I like about, that, if there is issues in leadership inside of an organization, I find it very hard to think that, because I've seen where people have said, whatever's wrong with, Chevrolet can fix,
right.
and so, I think it's important to have those outside perspectives from people that can come in and say, this is what I've seen out there. This is where I see, because again, your competitors are not going to share their inside secrets with you. So what you want are people who have worked with people, maybe not necessarily direct competitors, but maybe people in your industry that can tell you, kind of this is where you are on a maturity scale. And I think that's super valuable because people can really start to see where the gaps are. And I think, like you said, if you've got somebody like yourself coming in and being able to talk through those pieces, you're coming in from a non-biased sort of approach, right? You're not there necessarily to push an agenda of any kind. And that's where I've seen things work. What about frameworks like Traction or those sorts of things? What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think all those frameworks can provide value because they give you pieces that you can use, but you need to be intentional still, right? So it's still going beyond just looking at the framework or even just kind of talking about the framework and saying, well, what does this mean when you try to integrate it as a leader? And I think that you have to, those frameworks provide direction, but they don't provide clarity always as to what
Yeah,
you need to do as a leader. And that's where having some of that, and again, you can do this internally in your own company. You don't need to bring someone from the outside like me in. You can bring me in, and hey, definitely, I'm open to it. But if you have leaders in your organization, if you're not having those conversations one-on-one with them and saying, hey, like, how can I help you be a better leader? How can we use your unique way of leading to be more effective in whatever framework or model we want to use? Isn't the point. It's the
sure.
conversations, it's the intentionality that you can use in those situations to do that, because people want that. Like, it used to be that organizations and workplaces didn't focus on developing people. It was just kind of, here's
Yep.
your task list, right? Here's what you need to get done.
Yep.
And that was it. If you either got it done or you didn't. Things are changing. You mentioned earlier kind of how, post-pandemic or post-second pandemic or whatever we want to call this,
Yeah.
What do we need to remember? Well, we need to remember that people want to be developed. It's not just about their job description. People want to be coached. They want ongoing conversations moving forward. And if we're not giving them that, I'm not sure if you've been seeing any of the headlines recently, Kurt, but they're talking about, some of the next little while, it could be some of the biggest turnover rates in almost every sector, because after we come out of the pandemic, everyone's going to be ready to do something different or get, flex a little bit and try something new because they just wanted to survive during the pandemic. So if you don't want that turnover in your organization, you've got to be just crazy intentional about developing your people,
Yep.
building your teams, giving them a reason to want to stick around, because they're not leaving. They might be leaving a little bit for money, but most of the time money is not the biggest factor in why someone leaves. The biggest factor by far is their boss, as to who their boss is and how their boss is leading them.
Yeah.
So if you're not doing that, your people are going to be, in the next 6 months, I predict lots of companies are going to have way more turnover than they expect.
Yeah, and I think, again, it goes back to your earlier statement about it's top down. So if the company doesn't have a vision or impact in the world, I can't translate that to my leaders and how they can groom and coach our people to what their role is going to be in that impact that we're going to make overall in the world. Many of these organizations is just make more widgets, make more margin on our widgets, and that's our goal. So I think it is a trickle down from this larger sect of that. There was nothing to grasp on from a vision standpoint, anyways, unless you made it up yourself. And I've worked at places before where I've created a vision statement for my team because there wasn't necessarily one for the organization. And right. I encourage people to do that all the time because, don't wait for your organization to define what impact you're going to have. Like, you and your team as a leader, you can define your own impact that you want to have. And maybe it will become like a bad metaphor, but like a virus in the organization and spread its way around and infect other people into wanting to create a larger vision and impact that they want to have.
Yeah, a different kind of pandemic in your organization, a vision pandemic.
Right, a vision pandemic. Oh, wait, I got to write that down.
It's interesting. About a year ago, just over a year ago, after the pandemic first started, I reached out to a number of organizations and I just said, hey, can I do a webinar for you guys? It was chambers of commerce and those kind of organizations. And I talked about, because lots of people are in uncertainty, and I talked about leading through uncertain times. And I think that even as we're coming out of the pandemic and some of that certainty comes back, the principles that I talked about over a year ago still apply. And it relates to another one of Gallup's resources called strengths-based leadership. But they did a study. Gallup does a lot of those studies and research around what the average person wanted from their leaders. And they talked to over 10,000 people, and basically they compiled the answers into 4 key principles. And I'm just kind of shortening how they got there, but the 4 key principles that they came up with that the average person wanted from their leaders was trust, compassion, stability, and hope. And I think it speaks, when you talk about vision, to me that's hope, right? What's the vision we have? What's the hope that we have? Where are we going? How can I be motivated by that? But if you're leading, and if you want a framework that's easy to kind of tap into as a leader, just use trust, compassion, stability, and hope. How am I leading my team in a way that shows that they can trust me? How am I leading in a way that shows that I care? How stable is our workplace? Do they have confidence that their job's going to be here tomorrow? That their job's going to be here a year from now? And do they have hope that we're moving somewhere, that there's a purpose, there's a vision that we can grab hold of? So trust, compassion, stability, and hope, if you can tap into those, especially coming out of the pandemic, that's going to make a big impact on your team. And you can talk about it with them. It's a great talking point. The next team meeting you have, just say, hey, trust, compassion, stability, and hope. How can we build this as a team? How can I be a better leader? In your next one-on-one, ask them that. And you're going to start getting some really good answers back. That's going to motivate them or encourage them to stick around when everyone else is going through the great workplace switch.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. The future is here, I guess.
Yeah.
We're living in it, and where do you see? I mean, you and I had talked about this when we had pre-gamed the show. One thing that I've noticed over the past year is that with people being remote, bad leadership had nowhere to hide anymore. So it was, a spotlight was shown on it because they couldn't hide anymore. You can't hide on a Zoom call and whatever else in terms of your decision making and the way you impact and communicate with your organization. So where do you see things going? Obviously there's all these warning signs about the great migration or whatever. It's like, well, is it just a shell game? Like they're just going to move to other organizations. Like people aren't going to just like stop working forever.
Right.
But what should leaders be prepared for in the next year? What are you seeing?
Yeah, one of the metaphors, and I forget where I heard this, but when the tide goes out, you see who's not wearing a swimsuit, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what we found in the pandemic, whether it's from a leader standpoint or from an organizational standpoint. We just went through a bunch of tough times. It was really hard. The leaders that weren't very good leaders, not that they can't be good leaders, they still might be able to be good leaders, but maybe they didn't know what to do or they weren't empowered, kind of got exposed. And it's not going to get any easier as we come out of this. So I think when you are thinking of how do I, especially working virtually, what are some key things that I need to do? And many people, you probably know this, or you probably have heard this already. The big thing is that people are going to feel more and more disconnected within the world of working virtually. There's a lot of benefits to working virtually, but it's a very different beast to build a virtual culture than an in-person culture.
Yeah.
You're working against all those things that happen naturally in an office where you're hanging out at the water cooler, you all of a sudden have your lunch break together, you walk down the hallway and you see someone working in their office, you just pop your head in and say, hey, how was the weekend? Those kind of things just don't happen the way that they did. And they probably, especially with companies staying virtual or even a mix of virtual, your culture is going to be one of the biggest factors. So what I encourage people a lot to do, and you mentioned some of them already, is first and foremost, make sure that you're communicating more than you think you need to. Communicate. If you're a leader, communicate to your people, communicate what's going on, communicate what you know, communicate project status, give them information so that they feel more connected, because they're spending hours of the day, if they're working virtually, work at home, disconnected. They're connected through a monitor, but really how connected is through a monitor. And really, even if they're connected through a monitor, a lot of workplaces don't have their webcams on all 8 hours a day to see each other. They might tap to have a virtual meeting every once in a while. Communicate. And the second piece, and I encourage a lot of leaders, that this is whether you're virtual or not, but this is going to be really key as we kind of come out of the pandemic. Conversations with your team members are the biggest tool you have.
Yeah,
that's the biggest tool you have, having those conversations. If you're not talking with your team members, how do you know what's going on? How do you know what they're struggling with? How do you know what they need from you? And virtually especially, we're not getting as many of those kind of nonverbal cues from them. We're not walking by their office and seeing them with their head down on their desk because they're having a crummy day. We're not seeing if they walk in with a special spring in their step because something good happened, right? We're missing all of those cues. And so have conversations. Don't just go straight to, hey, let's talk about the project. Be willing to have conversations beyond just project status. So if you're having team meetings, intentionally spend time at the beginning of your team meetings not talking about projects. Or maybe have a meeting every once in a while. Again, people are tired of Zoom meetings, and I get that. But have a meeting every once in a while where you just talk about whatever, right? You just shoot the breeze. Yep. Figure out ways to be creative, to have conversations, and have connection. That would be the biggest thing that I'd encourage people to do, because if people aren't feeling connected, they're the ones that are going to be stepping out. They need to feel connected.
Yeah, I think, because again, back to your point about the human nature of things, I mean, we, as a species, we really pick up on visual cues for a lot of things. And so, it might be, just like you said, it might be seeing somebody sitting there and being able to stick your head in, but even seeing when somebody leaves for lunch and who's going into that meeting and and who's on that phone call with who, and who's meeting with who's that client that walked in, and all these things that inspire a lot of conversation, questions, creativity, being a part of that environment. But, back to your point about like, there's all these people that are like, well, I want to work from home because I'm not seeing value in that. I feel like there's going to be a big rebound in the next year with a lot of that. And that's why, I've encouraged leaders not to put down like super hardcore policies around work from home and those sorts of things, because I do feel that human nature will sort of just figure it out. If we are going to change as a species and we're fine with 2 dimensions from now on, then that's evolution, fine, but right now I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing there will be kind of this snapback, like the rubber bands being stretched a little too far in the staying away from other people mode. And so no matter how much of an extrovert or introvert you are, there is a lot of value in the subconscious of us picking up on these visual cues when we are inside of an office.
Well, when you're in person, and I think that I agree with you. I think that there is going to be a pushback towards in-person offices. There's going to be some people who stay virtual and they'll figure out how to make it work, hopefully. And some people, even within it's going to be a hybrid of some sort, and they're going to figure out how to make that work as well. But there is something that when you have the in-person connection, that you can never replicate virtually, because there's a way that we, I don't know what it would be specifically called, but this energy, that we get from being around people, that isn't there virtually. It's not the same energy, that's for sure.
Nope.
And that's what people are going to miss.
It's a very different experience. All right, Ben. Well, I could talk to you for days, and you got to come back on the show sometime. If I want to know more about the work you do, where's a good place to go and find out more info? So you could come in and do a tech accelerator with more folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can take a look at my website, canteraleadership.com. That's CANTERA leadership.com. The website, I need to be doing some updates on it. You won't find a ton on there about the Tech Leader Accelerator. But on LinkedIn is probably the best way to find out more. I got a lot of posts about the Tech Leader Accelerator. You can also just reach out to me. I mean, regardless of the Tech Leader Accelerator, reach out to me on LinkedIn, make a connection. I always love making new connections on LinkedIn. Happy to be there as a resource for leadership for you, and have any conversations that people want to have. My blood gets going. I get enthusiastic when I talk leadership. So check out those places, LinkedIn and my website.
Okay. Cantera Leadership. I love it. And Ben, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day today. I really appreciate you sharing. I just appreciate the work that you're doing. I think it's important work. And let's get you back on the show sometime soon.
Yeah, I'd love to be back on. Thanks for having me on. And for everyone who's listening, just encourage you, be intentional with your leadership, find some of those sacred leadership moments, and go and make a difference with your teams. Grow your teams to be the best teams ever.
I love it. Thanks, Ben. All right, everyone. Speaking of growing teams, well, look what I got here. I've got an opportunity for you, or someone you know, or someone they know. And that is foundrymakes.com/careers. We're hiring a bunch of different roles. We've got a pretty strong growth plan for the next few years. We'd love to have you be a part of it. So if you want to chat about opportunities, maybe you don't see a role exactly that fits what you're doing, but you find the work that we're doing interesting, drop us a note. Let's have a conversation. Why not? I mean, who's it going to hurt? It's not going to hurt you. I think it's going to be great. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Have a fantastic rest of your week.